At my daughter's wedding to a millionaire, I noticed something strange about his family. I stayed quiet, but took action. 10 minutes later, the wedding ended right there. The Montgomery estate in the Hamptons sprawled before me like something from a magazine spread. Manicured gardens, white tents billowing in the sea breeze, champagne fountains catching the afternoon sun. Everything gleamed with wealth and privilege, a world away from the modest university campus where I taught psychology. My daughter Olivia stood beneath a rose-covered arch, radiant in her designer gown, gazing adoringly at Ethan Montgomery as he recited his vows. She'd always been beautiful, but today she shimmered with happiness, finally attaining the life of luxury she'd dreamed of since childhood. A life I could never provide her as a widowed professor who'd raised her on a single income. "You are everything I've been searching for," Ethan was saying, his voice carrying across the assembled guests. 300 of New York's elite, with me and my sister Janet, representing Olivia's entire family side. I should have been fully absorbed in the moment, teary-eyed with maternal pride. Instead, a persistent unease had been growing within me since we'd arrived at the Montgomery estate yesterday. 20 years of teaching human behavior had honed my ability to read people, and something about the Montgomery family felt rehearsed, like actors hitting their marks in a well-practiced play. Diana Montgomery, Ethan's mother, sat in the front row, her posture perfect, her smile fixed. Every 45 minutes precisely, she discreetly took a pill with a sip of champagne. Her eyes never quite matched her smile when she looked at my daughter. Walter Montgomery, the pharmaceutical tycoon and family patriarch, moved through the crowd with calculated charm, but I'd noticed how servers flinched when he approached and how his smile vanished the instant he turned away from conversations. Most concerning was Ethan himself. The man marrying my daughter kept checking his phone throughout the ceremony, his expression tightening each time. During what should have been the most important moment of his life, his attention was clearly elsewhere. As the officiant continued the ceremony, I shifted in my seat, trying to shake off my discomfort. Perhaps I was being overprotective, seeing problems where there were only normal pre-wedding jitters. Maybe my middle-class background made me naturally suspicious of such overwhelming wealth. "I'll be right back," I whispered to Janet, slipping away toward the restroom inside the main house. The Montgomery mansion was eerily quiet compared to the celebration outside, my heels clicking on marble floors as I navigated the cavernous hallways. Approaching the bathroom, I slowed at the sound of male voices coming from a partially open door to a study. "The situation with the contaminated batch is contained for now," I heard Walter Montgomery saying, his voice stripped of the charm he displayed publicly. "But we need someone to take responsibility when it breaks." Another male voice responded, too low for me to make out clearly. "Ethan assured me his wife will be perfect for that," Walter continued. "Once this wedding is over, we can transfer the legal liability without raising suspicions." I froze, my body pressed against the wall, heart hammering. Had I misheard? Were they talking about my daughter? "The regulatory filing deadline is Tuesday," the second man said, audible now. "How quickly can the new Mrs. Montgomery be installed as Director of Quality Control?" "The paperwork is already prepared, backdated appropriately. She'll sign it tomorrow during the tour of the company Ethan has planned. By the time the FDA investigation intensifies, her signature will be on all the relevant approvals. And she has no pharmaceutical experience? That's perfect. Negligence rather than malice. Shorter sentence. Sentence. The word echoed in my mind like a gunshot. I must have made a sound because the voices suddenly stopped. I hurried toward the bathroom, locking the door behind me as footsteps passed in the hallway. My hands trembled as I gripped the marble countertop, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The conversation replayed in my mind, its implications horrifying. Were the Montgomerys planning to make my daughter the scapegoat for some kind of pharmaceutical scandal? A sacrificial lamb to protect their family empire? My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Sarah Reynolds, former Montgomery Pharmaceuticals executive. We met briefly at the rehearsal dinner. Your daughter is in danger. They plan to use her as their fall person for a deadly mistake. I have proof. Meet me at the East Garden gazebo immediately." "You have minutes, not hours." I remembered Sarah, a poised woman in her 50s who'd seemed uncomfortable during the dinner, barely touching her food as Walter gave a speech about welcoming Olivia to our family business. Splashing cold water on my face, I forced myself to breathe deeply, to think clearly. My academic background in psychology had taught me to question, analyze, verify before jumping to conclusions. But my maternal instincts were screaming. Returning to the ceremony, I slid back into my seat beside Janet. The officiant was now asking if anyone knew of any reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage. The traditional moment of silence followed. No one spoke. Of course not. The Montgomerys had orchestrated every detail of this day to perfection. Ethan's phone buzzed again. He checked it surreptitiously, his jaw tightening momentarily before his practiced smile returned. "Now," the officiant continued, "I invite the couple to exchange rings as a symbol of their endless commitment." Endless commitment. The phrase struck me as darkly ironic, given what I just overheard. How committed was Ethan to my daughter if he was planning to sacrifice her freedom to save his family's reputation? I had minutes to act. Once those rings were exchanged, once the marriage was legal, their plan would proceed. Tomorrow, they would take her to the company, have her sign backdated documents, position her to take the fall for whatever contaminated batch disaster they were covering up. I needed to reach my daughter. I needed to find Sarah Reynolds and see her proof. I needed to stop this wedding before it was too late. As Ethan reached for the ring to place on Olivia's finger, I made my decision. 20 years of cautious academic observation gave way to maternal determination. I stood up. "I'm so sorry," I announced, loud enough to halt the proceedings. "I'm feeling terribly unwell. Olivia, darling, could you please help me for a moment?" 300 faces turned toward me, expressions ranging from concern to annoyance at the interruption. Olivia looked momentarily conflicted, then whispered something to Ethan and hurried to my side. "Mom, what's wrong?" she whispered, taking my arm. "Can it wait 5 minutes?" "No," I said firmly, guiding her away from the altar. "It absolutely cannot wait 5 minutes. Your entire future depends on it." "Mom, you're scaring me," Olivia whispered as I pulled her toward the east garden, away from the puzzled murmurs of 300 guests. Her wedding gown rustled against the manicured grass, designer heels sinking into the soil. "What's going on?" "I'm in the middle of my wedding." "I know, sweetheart." My grip on her arm remained firm, my pace deliberate, and I wouldn't do this if it wasn't absolutely critical. I could feel Ethan's eyes on us as we moved away, saw Walter Montgomery lean over to whisper something to his son. Time was running short. Whatever window of opportunity I had was closing fast. The East Garden gazebo stood partially hidden behind a row of perfectly trimmed hedges, offering a small pocket of privacy amidst the sprawling estate. Sarah Reynolds was waiting, a leather portfolio clutched to her chest, her elegant gray suit contrasting sharply with her tense expression. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you." Her voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the urgency beneath her professional demeanor. "Olivia, we haven't been properly introduced. I'm Sarah Reynolds. I was Executive Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at Montgomery Pharmaceuticals until 5 years ago." "What is this about?" Olivia's confusion was giving way to irritation. She glanced back toward the ceremony. "Everyone's waiting. Ethan is waiting. Ethan is why we're here." Sarah opened her portfolio, removing a USB drive and several documents. "Olivia, I need you to listen carefully. The Montgomery family plans to use you as a scapegoat for a pharmaceutical disaster they created. They intend to make you legally responsible for approving a contaminated medication that has already killed 12 people. Olivia's face went blank with shock. That's insane. Ethan loves me. We're getting married." "You're getting married because they need someone outside the family to take the fall," I said gently, showing her the text message from Sarah. "I overheard Walter discussing it with someone just minutes ago." Sarah handed Olivia an email printout. "This is from Ethan to his father, dated 3 months ago, 2 weeks after your engagement was announced." Olivia's hands trembled as she read aloud. "Dad, I agree Olivia is perfect for our purposes. She's ambitious enough to accept an executive title without asking questions about actual responsibilities, and naive enough to believe we're giving her an opportunity based on merit." Her voice faltered. "This can't be real." "Keep reading," Sarah urged. "Her background in marketing makes her perfect. No pharmaceutical experience means negligence rather than intent when the investigation happens. I've already discussed with legal how we'll position her. The marriage provides necessary cover for the rapid promotion." Olivia looked up, her face ashen. "There must be some explanation." "There is," Sarah said grimly, pulling out more documents. "The explanation is that Montgomery Pharmaceuticals produced a contaminated batch of their blood pressure medication, Cardiazem. They discovered the contamination during quality testing, but shipped it anyway because recalling it would have impacted their stock price before an important merger. I wrapped an arm around Olivia's shoulders as Sarah continued, laying out the evidence methodically. 12 people have died so far from fungal infections traced to the contamination. The FDA investigation is intensifying. They need someone to take responsibility, someone who isn't named Montgomery. Sarah's gaze was steady, sympathetic, but unflinching. That's you, Olivia. Tomorrow, during your tour of the company, they plan to have you sign paperwork accepting a position as Director of Quality Control, backdated to before the contamination was discovered. When the investigation concludes, you'll be the one facing criminal charges, I added softly, the horror of it constricting my chest. Not Ethan, not Walter, you. Olivia shook her head repeatedly, wedding veil swaying with the movement. No, Ethan wouldn't do this to me. We're in love. We're starting a life together. Sarah pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and handed it to Olivia. This is a recorded conversation between Ethan and Walter from last week. I still have sources inside the company who are as disgusted by this as I am. Ethan's voice emerged from the phone, unnervingly casual. Dad, are you sure we need to actually marry her for this to work? The engagement gave us the cover we needed for the paperwork prep. Walter's response was immediate. The marriage creates a stronger legal shield, son. Spousal privilege. She can't be compelled to testify against you if it comes to that. And after? Once she's served her purpose? Divorce is simple enough. The prenup ensures she gets nothing from the Montgomery fortune. Though I doubt it will come to that. She'll likely be in prison for at least 3 years. Federal sentencing guidelines for negligence leading to death are quite clear. Olivia swayed on her feet. I tightened my grip around her shoulders, feeling her body begin to shake. He said he loved me, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Olivia, Sarah said, genuine compassion in her eyes. I was like you once. I believed in the Montgomerys and what our company stood for. When I discovered what they were willing to do for profit, I confronted Walter. They forced me out with an ironclad NDA and threats to destroy my career. I've been gathering evidence ever since, waiting for the right moment to expose them. Why now? I asked. Why this moment? Because once Olivia signs those documents tomorrow, she becomes legally culpable. The moment that ring goes on her finger, the trap closes. Sarah checked her watch. We have maybe 5 minutes before they come looking for you. As if summoned by her words, I spotted Ethan emerging from behind the hedges, his face a mask of concern that no longer looked genuine to my eyes. Walter followed close behind, his expression considerably less controlled, anger barely concealed beneath a veneer of worry. Darling, is everything all right? Ethan called, striding toward us. Your mother seems unwell. Perhaps we should get her inside and continue with our ceremony? I felt Olivia stiffen beside me, saw something shift in her eyes as she looked at the man she'd been about to marry, the scales falling away, harsh reality replacing romance. Actually, she said, her voice stronger than I expected, I think we need to discuss something important, Ethan. She held up the papers in her hand. Like why you told your father I'm perfect to take the fall for your contaminated medication. Ethan froze mid-stride, his practiced smile faltering for just an instant before reasserting itself. Sweetheart, what are you talking about? What papers? Who is this woman? He gestured dismissively toward Sarah. Walter stepped forward, his authority filling the space. This is clearly a misunderstanding. Ms. Reynolds is a disgruntled former employee with a personal vendetta against our family. Whatever she's told you is slander, pure and simple. Is this your voice on this recording, Ethan? Olivia held up Sarah's phone. After she served her purpose? 3 years in prison? Each question struck like a physical blow, her voice gaining strength from her rising anger. Were you really planning to make me take the blame for people dying? The facade cracked. I watched Ethan's face transform, charm giving way to cold calculation as he realized denial was futile. Walter moved closer to his son, a united front of wealth and power. Olivia, Walter said smoothly, business is complex. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. The Montgomery Pharmaceuticals legacy helps millions of people. Surely you can understand. Understand? Olivia's laugh was brittle. Understand that you were planning to send me to prison to protect your stock price? I squeezed her hand, immensely proud of her strength in this moment. I think, I said clearly, that we should return to the ceremony and make an announcement. Walter's eyes narrowed. I wouldn't recommend that. Was that a threat, Mr. Montgomery? I stepped protectively closer to Olivia, my academic demeanor giving way to something fiercer. 20 years as a psychology professor had taught me to recognize intimidation tactics, and I wasn't about to let Walter Montgomery intimidate my daughter or me. Not at all, Dr. Wilson. Walter's smile didn't reach his eyes. Merely a suggestion that family matters are best discussed privately. 300 guests don't need to be involved in what is clearly a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Olivia's voice trembled with rage as she held up the evidence. You literally discussed how long I'd be in prison. How is that a misunderstanding? Ethan moved toward Olivia, his hands outstretched placatingly. The transformation in him was remarkable, the loving fiancé replaced by a calculated performer, each gesture precise and practiced. Baby, please. These documents are being taken completely out of context. Let's just go back to our wedding, finish the ceremony, and I'll explain everything tomorrow. He reached for her hand. You know how much I love you. Olivia stepped back, bumping into the gazebo railing. Don't touch me. The words came out in a whisper, then gained strength. Don't touch me, Ethan. I heard your voice on that recording. Your actual voice, planning to let me go to prison for something your family did. Walter's facade of reasonableness slipped momentarily, his eyes flicking to Sarah Reynolds with unmistakable malice. Sarah, I'm disappointed. After everything our family did for you, the generous settlement, the continued health care for your mother, all contingent on your discretion, if you recall. I recall exactly what your generosity bought, Walter, Sarah replied, her composure impressive under his glare. My silence about routine corporate malfeasance. Not my complicity in making an innocent woman take the fall for manslaughter. I noticed Walter's right hand slide into his pocket, withdrawing his phone and tapping it discreetly. Reinforcements being summoned, no doubt. We need to move, I said quietly to Olivia. We're going back to the ceremony. Right now. Olivia nodded, clutching the evidence to her chest. I saw her wedding dress with new eyes, no longer a symbol of fairy tale romance, but a beautiful costume in a carefully orchestrated performance. This discussion isn't finished, Walter said, his tone hardening as we moved to leave the gazebo. You're right about that. Sarah's professional calm had an edge of satisfaction. The FDA investigator I contacted this morning would agree, as would the Justice Department officials receiving my evidence package as we speak. Walter's composure shattered. You stupid bitch, you have no idea what you've done. He turned to his son. Call Stevens, now. Tell him to lock down everything and get these women contained before they make a scene. Contained, I echoed, ice filling my veins. Mr. Montgomery, we're leaving now. My daughter, myself, and Ms. Reynolds. Any attempt to prevent us from doing so would constitute unlawful detention. Ethan pulled his father aside, speaking urgently in hushed tones. I caught fragments, not worth it, and too public, and other ways to handle this. Walter's face flushed with anger, but he gave a curt nod. Taking advantage of their distraction, I guided Olivia and Sarah away from the gazebo, moving quickly toward the ceremony. A security guard stepped into our path, one of several I'd noticed patrolling the estate perimeter. Ladies, Mr. Montgomery asked that you wait a moment, he said, his tone professional but firm. Did he? I smiled pleasantly, channeling every ounce of professorial authority I'd developed over 2 decades. Well, you can tell Mr. Montgomery that we're returning to my daughter's wedding ceremony, which was interrupted when I felt unwell. Unless you have some legal basis to detain the bride at her own wedding, I suggest you step aside immediately. The guard hesitated, clearly unprepared for direct resistance. Additionally, Sarah added smoothly, I'm recording this interaction. She held up her phone. For the safety of everyone involved, the guard stepped aside reluctantly, his hand moving to the radio at his belt. We walked briskly toward the ceremony area, where confused guests were still seated, murmuring amongst themselves. The officiant stood awkwardly at the altar, consulting quietly with Diana Montgomery, whose perfect composure seemed brittle around the edges. Mom, Olivia whispered as we approached, what exactly am I supposed to do here? Tell the truth, I said simply, or as much of it as you need to. In front of everyone? It's so humiliating. I squeezed her hand. More humiliating than prison for something you didn't do? Than being married to a man who sees you as expendable? Her spine straightened. You're right. We reached the altar just as Ethan and Walter emerged from the garden, moving quickly toward us. Diana's eyes widened at whatever she saw in her husband's expression. Is everything all right? The officiant asked, confusion evident in his voice. Shall we continue with the ceremony? Olivia took a deep breath and turned to face the assembled guests. I stood beside her, a hand on her back, feeling her trembling beneath the expensive satin of her gown. I apologize for the interruption, she began, her voice carrying clearly across the hushed gathering. But I need to make an announcement. There will be no wedding today. A collective gasp rose from the guests. Diana Montgomery pressed a hand to her mouth. Ethan and Walter were now pushing their way down the aisle toward us. Some information has come to light that makes it impossible for me to marry Ethan Montgomery. Olivia's voice gained strength with each word. I've discovered that our relationship was not what I believed it to be. Ethan reached us then, his charming smile firmly in place, though his eyes were cold. Darling, you're upset. Let's discuss this privately. No. Olivia stepped away from his outstretched hand. There will be no more private discussions where you can manipulate me. No more secrets. Walter moved to the microphone stand, his practiced public persona taking over. Ladies and gentlemen, please accept our apologies for this unfortunate situation. It appears the bride is experiencing some pre-wedding anxiety. If you'll all proceed to the reception area for champagne, we'll sort this out momentarily. The bride, I said clearly, stepping up to the microphone myself, is experiencing the natural reaction of someone who just discovered she was being married for the express purpose of taking the blame for corporate negligence that has already killed 12 people. The silence that followed was absolute. This is outrageous, Walter hissed, reaching for the microphone. Is it? Sarah Reynolds stepped forward, her portfolio open. I have documents proving that Montgomery Pharmaceuticals knowingly distributed contaminated medication and planned to frame Olivia for the decision after the wedding. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I spotted several guests discreetly recording on their phones. Among the assembled elite were journalists, competitors, and social media influencers. Exactly the audience the Montgomerys would least want to witness this revelation. These are serious accusations, Walter said, voice tight with controlled fury. Completely unfounded, libelous accusations from a disgruntled former employee with mental health issues. Olivia stepped forward, dignity wrapped around her like armor despite her elaborate wedding gown and tear-streaked makeup. I have heard Ethan's voice on a recording discussing how I would serve as the perfect scapegoat, she said, her voice unwavering. Discussing how my marketing background and lack of pharmaceutical experience would make negligence charges stick. Discussing how my prison sentence would likely be 3 years. Ethan's facade finally cracked. Olivia, stop. You don't understand how these things work. Sometimes in business, you frame your wife for manslaughter? Her laugh was bitter. Is that the lesson here? The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Several guests stood, moving toward the exits or pulling out phones. Diana Montgomery had gone deathly pale, reaching into her purse for what I assumed were her pills. Walter's security team was converging on us now, but it was too late. The damage was done. The perfect Montgomery image was unraveling in real time before hundreds of witnesses. This wedding is over, Olivia announced, her voice steady despite everything. And so is my relationship with the Montgomery family. As if to punctuate her declaration, she pulled the diamond engagement ring from her finger and placed it deliberately on the altar. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of motion and emotion. From the moment Olivia placed that diamond ring on the altar, a gesture that felt both defiant and heartbreaking in its finality, events accelerated with dizzying speed. Walter Montgomery's security team had moved to surround us, but they hesitated when confronted with 300 witnesses and dozens of recording phones. In that critical moment of uncertainty, Sarah Reynolds made a call that changed everything. Agent Davis, she said clearly into her phone. I'm at the Montgomery estate. The situation has escalated. We could use your presence now. I didn't know if there actually was an Agent Davis on the other end of that call, but the effect was electric. Walter's security team backed off immediately. Walter himself went ashen, years of careful calculation crumbling before my eyes as he realized how completely he'd lost control of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the officiant announced awkwardly, "it appears the ceremony has concluded. Please proceed to your vehicles." The elegant exodus that followed was anything but orderly. Guests hurried away, their expressions ranging from shocked to morbidly fascinated. Several approached Olivia with quiet words of support. Others pointedly avoided eye contact, their allegiances clearly with the Montgomery fortune rather than the truth. Diana Montgomery collapsed. Whether from genuine shock or a calculated diversion, I couldn't tell. The resulting commotion allowed Ethan and Walter to retreat into the mansion without further confrontation. Janet, my sister, appeared at my side. "I've called a car," she said, her arm protectively around Olivia's shoulders. "Let's get out of here before they regroup." We left the Montgomery estate with Sarah Reynolds accompanying us, her portfolio of evidence clutched tightly to her chest. No one tried to stop us. The family that had so meticulously planned my daughter's downfall seemed suddenly paralyzed, their perfect script shattered beyond repair. In the car, Olivia finally broke down, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. I held her as she cried, her wedding dress crushed between us, her carefully styled hair coming undone. "I loved him, Mom," she whispered between sobs. "I really thought he loved me." "I know, sweetheart." What else could I say? No words could soften the brutal reality that the man she'd trusted had seen her as nothing more than a convenient sacrifice. They were going to send me to prison. Actually send me to prison. Her voice held bewildered horror. How could anyone do that? Sarah, seated across from us, answered quietly. "The Montgomerys don't see themselves as subject to the same rules as everyone else. They've been insulated by wealth and power for so long that other people aren't quite real to them. Just pieces to move around their board." The car took us to a hotel well away from the Hamptons, a modest place Janet had chosen precisely because it wasn't the type of establishment the Montgomerys would think to look for us. We checked in under Janet's name, taking adjoining rooms and ordering room service rather than venturing out. That first night, Olivia slept fitfully, still in her slip from beneath the wedding dress, which lay discarded in a white puddle on the hotel room floor. I stayed awake, watching her breathe, trying to process everything that had happened and what might come next. Sarah joined me on the small balcony around midnight, 2 cups of terrible hotel coffee in hand. "The FDA raid will happen tomorrow morning," she said quietly, offering me one of the cups. "The Justice Department investigation will follow. I've been building this case for years, waiting for enough evidence to move forward. Will Olivia be implicated in any way?" My primary concern remained my daughter's safety. Sarah shook her head. "No. I've been very clear with the authorities about the Montgomery's plan and Olivia's complete innocence. In fact, she'll likely be asked to testify against them eventually. Is that safe? These people were willing to send her to prison to protect themselves. What else might they do?" "That's precisely why I recommended we stay somewhere unexpected tonight," Sarah acknowledged. "But once the federal investigation begins, the Montgomerys will be far too preoccupied with their own legal problems to retaliate. Walter and Ethan will be fighting for their freedom, not plotting revenge." I sipped the bitter coffee, watching the suburban parking lot below our balcony. How strange that just hours ago we'd been at one of the most opulent estates on the East Coast, and now we were hiding in a roadside hotel that advertised free HBO as its main amenity. "Why did you do it?" I asked suddenly. "Help us, I mean. You must have taken an enormous risk." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her face partially shadowed in the dim light. 5 years ago, I discovered that the company was falsifying data on a new drug's clinical trials. When I brought it to Walter's attention, expecting him to be as appalled as I was, he offered me a choice: take a generous severance and keep quiet, or be destroyed professionally and personally. She sighed. I took the money. My mother was sick, needed expensive care. I justified it to myself. "But you kept gathering evidence," she nodded. "People died from that drug too. Fewer than the current situation, but each death weighed on me. I couldn't let it happen again, especially not to an innocent young woman who'd been deliberately set up." Morning brought news alerts about Montgomery Pharmaceuticals. FDA officials had entered their headquarters with search warrants. Trading of the company's stock was temporarily suspended. A preliminary statement mentioned an investigation into quality control violations related to their blood pressure medication. Olivia watched the coverage on the hotel television, her expression unreadable. She'd barely spoken since waking, moving through her morning routine mechanically, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "What happens now?" she asked finally, turning to Sarah and me. To them? To me? The Montgomerys will fight the charges with every resource at their disposal, Sarah explained. They have powerful connections, expensive lawyers, but the evidence is substantial. Eventually, they'll likely face criminal charges. And me? Olivia's voice was small. I moved to sit beside her on the bed. You rebuild, sweetheart. One day at a time. She laughed hollowly. Rebuild what? My career is tied to clients who are all connected to the Montgomerys. My apartment is filled with things Ethan bought. My friends. She broke off. God, were any of them actually my friends? Or were they all just part of the plan too? Not everything in your life was a lie, I said firmly. You had a life before Ethan Montgomery. You'll have one after him. Your mother's right, Sarah added. And when you're ready, your testimony could help ensure the Montgomerys face consequences for what they've done, not just to you, but to all the patients harmed by their negligence. Olivia nodded slowly, something hardening in her expression. Yes, I want that. I want them to face consequences. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, an unfamiliar number with a Manhattan area code. I almost declined it, wary of unknown callers after everything that had happened, but something made me answer. Dr. Wilson, this is Special Agent Rebecca Torres with the FBI. I understand you and your daughter have information relevant to our investigation into Montgomery Pharmaceuticals. We'd like to arrange a formal interview as soon as possible. I looked at Olivia, mouthing FBI silently. She straightened her shoulders and nodded firmly. Yes, Agent Torres, we do have information and we're ready to share it. As I arranged the details of our meeting with the FBI, I watched my daughter transform before my eyes, grief giving way to resolve, betrayal hardening into determination. The Montgomerys had mistaken her ambition for naivety, her trust for weakness. They had planned to use those qualities to destroy her. Instead, they had created their own worst nightmare, a woman with nothing left to lose and every reason to see justice done. 3 weeks after the wedding that never was, Olivia and I sat in a featureless conference room in the Manhattan Federal Building, waiting for her deposition to begin. She had chosen her outfit carefully that morning, a navy blue suit, conservative but confident, nothing that could be interpreted as flashy or attention-seeking. Nothing Montgomery adjacent, as she now described the designer wardrobe Ethan had cultivated for her. You ready for this? I asked, watching her arrange her water bottle and notebook with precise movements. She nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. As ready as I'll ever be. The door opened, and 3 people entered. Special Agent Torres, a trim woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and an economy of movement. Assistant U.S. Attorney James Harrington, whose reputation as a tenacious prosecutor had preceded him, and a court reporter who immediately began setting up her equipment. Ms. Wilson, thank you for coming in today, Agent Torres began, arranging files on the table. I know this isn't easy. I want to help, Olivia replied, her voice steadier than I'd expected. In the week since the wedding, she'd cycled through grief, rage, humiliation, and finally, a steely determination that reminded me so much of her father, it sometimes took my breath away. The formal part of the deposition began with standard questions. Olivia's background, her relationship with Ethan, how they'd met at a marketing event where her agency had been hired to rebrand a Montgomery Pharmaceuticals subsidiary. When did you first become aware of the position that was being created for you at Montgomery Pharmaceuticals? Harrington asked, his tone neutral but attentive. About a month after our engagement, Olivia replied. Ethan mentioned that his father was impressed with my marketing background and thought I might be valuable to the company. He suggested a role as Director of Quality Control, focusing on the public-facing aspects of quality assurance. Did that seem odd to you, given your lack of pharmaceutical experience? It did, Olivia admitted. I actually expressed concern about it, but Ethan said, her voice caught briefly. He said that my outsider perspective was exactly what they wanted, that sometimes people entrenched in the industry can't see problems that are obvious to newcomers. And you believed him? Yes. The simple word carried the weight of her shattered trust. I believed him. The questioning continued methodically, establishing a timeline of events and Olivia's growing awareness of the Montgomerys' true intentions. I watched my daughter answer with composure, even as she was forced to revisit the most painful betrayal of her life. When did you first see the evidence suggesting you were being positioned as a scapegoat? Torres asked. The day of the wedding, Olivia replied. Sarah Reynolds showed me emails between Ethan and Walter discussing how my lack of pharmaceutical experience would make me the perfect person to blame for the contaminated medication. They specifically mentioned that charges against me would likely result in prison time. And how did you respond to seeing this evidence? At first, I couldn't believe it. It seemed impossible that the man I was about to marry could do something so calculated, so cruel. Olivia's composure wavered slightly, but she steadied herself. But then I heard the recording of Ethan discussing with his father how my prison sentence would likely be around 3 years, and how that would be, she paused, swallowing hard, how that would be manageable for their long-term plans. Did Ethan Montgomery ever explicitly state to you what role he expected you to play regarding the contaminated medication? Not in those words. He mentioned several times that I would be taking on important responsibilities after the wedding, and that my signature would carry significant weight. I assumed he meant I would be doing actual marketing work related to quality control. Olivia's laugh held no humor. I even studied up on pharmaceutical quality assurance, wanting to impress him with my dedication. Meanwhile, he was planning for me to sign backdated documents that would make me legally responsible for approving a contaminated batch of medication that killed people. The deposition continued for 4 grueling hours. Olivia maintained her composure throughout, even when presented with additional evidence the FBI had gathered. Emails, meeting notes, and recorded conversations that painted an even more damning picture of the Montgomerys' intentions than we had initially seen. When they finally concluded, Agent Torres thanked Olivia for her cooperation. "Your testimony will be extremely valuable to our case, Ms. Wilson. The U.S. Attorney's Office may need you to testify if this goes to trial, but that would be months from now." "I'll testify," Olivia said firmly. "Whatever you need." As we gathered our belongings to leave, Harrington held back, speaking quietly. "You should know that the Montgomerys' legal team has been making noise about painting you as a jilted bride, retaliating with false accusations." "Of course they have," Olivia replied, unsurprised. "It's what they do. Twist the truth to protect themselves." "It won't work," Torres assured her. "The evidence speaks for itself, but be prepared for some unpleasant press coverage. The Montgomerys still have plenty of media connections." Outside the federal building, a light rain was falling. We huddled under my umbrella, waiting for our rideshare to arrive. Olivia seemed drained, but somehow lighter, as if unburdening herself of the full story had released something tight within her. "You did wonderfully in there," I told her, squeezing her hand. "Did I?" She looked up at the gray Manhattan sky. "I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the hardest thing to do." Our car pulled up, and we settled into the back seat, grateful for the momentary cocoon of privacy. Olivia had been staying with me since the wedding, unable to face returning to the apartment she'd shared with Ethan. My faculty housing wasn't spacious, but it provided a safe haven away from the media attention that had erupted in the wake of the wedding disaster and subsequent federal investigation. "The Post called again this morning," Olivia said as we drove through midtown traffic. "They want an exclusive. My side of the story," they said. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. I let it go to voicemail." She sighed, watching raindrops trace patterns on the window. "Part of me wants to tell everyone exactly what kind of people the Montgomerys are. Another part just wants to disappear and never think about any of this again." "Both reactions are perfectly valid," I assured her. "Sarah thinks I should write a book eventually." A small smile touched Olivia's lips. "She says my story could help other women recognize predatory relationships masked by wealth and charm." The mention of Sarah reminded me how unexpected alliances could form in times of crisis. The former Montgomery executive had become something of a mentor to Olivia over the past weeks, helping her navigate both the legal proceedings and the emotional aftermath of Ethan's betrayal. "That's not a bad idea," I mused. "When you're ready." "I'm not sure I'll ever be ready to relive all of this." Olivia leaned her head against the car window. "But I am ready for whatever comes next. The FBI, the potential trial." Her voice hardened slightly. "Making sure the Montgomerys can't do this to anyone else." As our car turned onto my quiet campus street, I studied my daughter's profile. The pain was still evident in the tightness around her eyes, the occasional tremble in her voice when she spoke of Ethan. But something else had emerged in these difficult weeks. A resilience I had always known was there, a strength of character that the Montgomerys had fatally underestimated. They had seen her marketing background and social ambitions and assumed she was shallow, malleable, expendable. They had never bothered to look deeper, to see the woman I had raised, principled, intelligent, and ultimately unwilling to be sacrificed on the altar of corporate greed. Their miscalculation would cost them everything. The first headline appeared in the New York Times on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the wedding that wasn't. Montgomery Pharmaceuticals executives indicted in fatal medication scandal. The front-page story detailed federal charges against Walter Montgomery, Ethan Montgomery, and 3 other executives for fraud, criminal negligence resulting in death, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Olivia stared at the newspaper spread across my kitchen table, coffee cooling untouched beside her. "It's really happening," she said quietly. I scanned the article quickly. The evidence must be overwhelming for them to move this quickly. Sarah said they found internal emails documenting exactly when the company discovered the contamination and Walter's direct order to ship the medication anyway. Olivia's finger traced the outline of Ethan's corporate headshot accompanying the article, plus the documented plan to frame me, which makes it premeditated, I noted. That will significantly impact sentencing if they're convicted. The article mentioned Olivia only briefly as the intended scapegoat whose wedding day revelation helped launch the federal investigation. Small mercies. The Times, at least, had respected her privacy. Other media outlets proved less restrained. By afternoon, my office phone at the university was ringing constantly. Reporters had somehow obtained my faculty contact information and were desperate for comments. The department secretary, bless her, ran interference after the 3rd call, telling all subsequent callers that Dr. Wilson was unavailable and would not be making statements. When I returned to my faculty apartment that evening, 2 news vans were parked outside. A young reporter approached as I walked from my car, microphone extended. "Dr. Wilson, can you comment on the indictment of your almost son-in-law? How is your daughter handling the revelation that her fiancé planned to make her take the fall for 12 deaths? I kept walking, keys clutched tightly in my hand. No comment. Is it true Olivia discovered the plot just minutes before saying "I do"? That you orchestrated a dramatic wedding intervention? The sensationalism made my stomach turn. Please respect our privacy during this difficult time. Inside, I found Olivia on the couch, laptop open, scrolling through an apparent avalanche of messages. Her expression was grim. "It's everywhere, Mom. Every news outlet, social media, industry blogs." She turned the screen toward me, showing a particularly vicious headline from a tabloid. "Jilted bride or corporate whistleblower. The woman who brought down the Montgomerys. They can't seem to decide if I'm a victim or a vindictive ex," Olivia continued, her voice tight. "The Montgomery PR machine is already spinning. Look at this statement from their lawyer." She clicked to another tab showing a video clip of an elegantly silver-haired attorney standing before a bank of microphones. "My clients categorically deny these baseless allegations, which originated from a disgruntled former employee and a young woman experiencing understandable emotional distress after a relationship ended. The Montgomery family has served this country's healthcare needs for generations and will vigorously defend their reputation against these defamatory claims." "Unbelievable," I muttered. "They're still trying to paint you as emotionally unstable." Classic Darvo, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Olivia closed her laptop with a decisive snap. "You taught me about that technique in high school, remember? When that girl was bullying my friend and then claimed she was the one being harassed." I smiled despite everything. "I'm impressed you remember my amateur psychology lessons. They're coming in handy now." She ran a hand through her hair, which had grown out from the elegant wedding style, returning to its natural waves. "I got calls from 3 former colleagues today. Apparently Montgomery connections run deep in the marketing world. 2 basically told me I was radioactive now, career-wise. The 3rd offered me a job writing an exposé blog about pharmaceutical marketing. Any interest in that last option?" "God, no." She shook her head emphatically. "I don't want to build a career on being the Montgomery whistleblower. I want to move forward." Her phone buzzed with an incoming call, the 5th in the past hour. She checked the screen and grimaced. Another college friend, probably wanting inside information for their Instagram. "You could turn it off," I suggested gently. "And hide? That feels like letting them win somehow." Nevertheless, she silenced the ringer, placing the phone face down on the coffee table. The next morning, the media presence outside had doubled. I called campus security, who helped escort us to my car, parked in the faculty lot. Reporters shouted questions as we hurried past, cameras capturing our retreat. Doctor Wilson, did you suspect something was wrong before the wedding day? Olivia, did you ever suspect Ethan was using you? How does it feel to narrowly escape being framed for manslaughter? In the safety of my car, Olivia's composure finally cracked. How long is this going to last? I feel like I'm living in a fishbowl. The news cycle will eventually move on, I assured her, though I wasn't entirely convinced. The Montgomery case had all the elements of an enduring scandal: wealth, betrayal, corporate malfeasance, lives lost. It was catnip to media outlets. We drove to Sarah Reynolds' apartment in Brooklyn, where she had invited us for lunch away from the campus media circus. Her building had security that kept reporters at bay, and the apartment itself offered sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline, a reminder of the life she'd built after leaving Montgomery Pharmaceuticals. I see you've discovered the joy of being news fodder, Sarah commented dryly, pouring us each a glass of wine despite the early hour. Welcome to the Montgomery experience. When I left the company, they had surrogates suggesting I had mental health issues, drug problems, and an inappropriate relationship with a board member, all simultaneously, somehow. How did you handle it? Olivia asked. Poorly at first, Sarah admitted. I tried fighting back, giving interviews, defending myself. It only fed the cycle. Eventually, I learned to simply focus on the evidence and let my actions speak for themselves. She raised her glass in a mock toast. 5 years of methodical evidence gathering later, here we are. The three of us settled in Sarah's living room, the Manhattan skyline a dramatic backdrop to our conversation. Sarah had more information about the case than was publicly available, thanks to her continued cooperation with the prosecution. They've frozen most of the Montgomery assets, she told us. Walter's trying to shield what he can through various shell companies and trusts, but the feds are remarkably thorough this time. And Ethan? Olivia asked, her voice carefully neutral. Sarah hesitated, studying Olivia's face before answering. He's turned on his father. What? Olivia set her wineglass down with a sharp clink. His lawyers are negotiating a deal. Reduced charges in exchange for testimony against Walter and the other executives. He's claiming he was just following orders, that he didn't understand the full implications of what was happening. Sarah's disgust was evident. Despite email evidence showing he was fully aware people had died, and he still proceeded with the plan to frame you. Olivia absorbed this information silently, her expression unreadable. Then she laughed, a short, bitter sound. Of course he did. Ethan always takes the path of least resistance. Why face consequences when you can sacrifice someone else? The prosecutors won't let him off easily, Sarah assured her. His deal, if it happens, still includes jail time. Just less of it. It's not about the jail time. Olivia shook her head. It's the pattern. He was willing to sacrifice me to protect his father. Now he's willing to sacrifice his father to protect himself. The only consistent thing is his unwillingness to take responsibility. As we left Sarah's apartment that afternoon, a text message alert buzzed on both our phones simultaneously, an unusual occurrence that immediately raised my concern. Olivia checked hers first, her face paling. It's from Janet, she said, referring to my sister. She says there's a situation at your apartment. Multiple news outlets are reporting that I've agreed to an exclusive interview detailing my relationship with Ethan and evidence of additional Montgomery crimes. What? You haven't agreed to any interviews? Olivia's expression hardened. No, I haven't. But someone wants the world to think I have. She looked up from her phone, eyes blazing with a familiar determination. The Montgomerys are trying to discredit me again. Make me look like I'm seeking publicity, selling my story. We need to issue a denial. No. Olivia's response was immediate and firm. That's exactly what they want. To draw me into a public back and forth that makes me look unstable or attention-seeking. She straightened her shoulders. We need a different approach entirely. What kind of different approach? I asked, as our taxi navigated Brooklyn traffic toward Manhattan. If not a denial, then what? Olivia's fingers flew across her phone screen, her marketing mind clearly in high gear. The Montgomerys excel at creating narratives. It's what they do. Spin stories that position them as the heroes, or at least as misunderstood victims. Right now, they're trying to reframe me as a publicity-hungry ex looking for my 15 minutes of fame, which couldn't be further from the truth, I noted, watching her with growing curiosity. Something had shifted in my daughter, the passive victim of circumstance transforming before my eyes into a strategic thinker. Exactly. So we don't play defense against their narrative. We create our own. She looked up from her phone, eyes bright with purpose. Mom, do you still have that contact at the American Journal of Psychology? The editor you peer-reviewed for last year? I blinked, surprised by the question. Dr. Harmon? Yes, we still email occasionally. Why? I need you to reach out to him. Today, if possible. By the time we reached my campus apartment, navigating through the increased media presence with the help of campus security, Olivia had outlined a plan so elegant in its simplicity that I couldn't help but admire it, even as I worried about the additional attention it might bring. It's risky, I cautioned, as we entered the apartment, locking the door firmly behind us. Once we do this, there's no going back. There's already no going back, Olivia replied, dropping her bag on the couch. The Montgomerys made sure of that when they tried to send me to prison for their crimes. At least this way, we control the narrative. I made the call to Dr. Harmon, explaining our unusual request. To his credit, he grasped the significance immediately. This could be extraordinarily valuable, Margaret, he said thoughtfully, not just as a record of this specific case, but as a scholarly examination of corporate malfeasance and the psychological manipulation involved. When can you submit the manuscript? 2 weeks, I promised, mentally clearing my teaching schedule. After ending the call, I found Olivia at my kitchen table, already drafting an outline on her laptop. Dr. Harmon's on board, I confirmed. He thinks it has significant academic merit. Good. Now we need to contact Assistant U.S. Attorney Harrington and make sure this won't interfere with their case. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of intense work. While media speculation about Olivia continued to swirl outside, fueled by strategic leaks from Montgomery sources suggesting she was negotiating book deals and movie rights, we remained sequestered in my apartment, focused on our counter-strategy. Harrington had given his blessing to our plan, with the caveat that we submit the final draft for review to ensure it wouldn't compromise the prosecution's case. Sarah Reynolds provided additional context and documentation that strengthened our analysis. What emerged was not the tell-all memoir or sensationalized account the media was expecting, but instead a co-authored academic paper for the American Journal of Psychology titled Psychological Manipulation in Corporate Crime, a case study in scapegoating and victim selection. The paper, written in the dispassionate language of academic research, methodically analyzed how the Montgomerys had selected, groomed, and positioned Olivia as their designated scapegoat. It examined the psychological tactics employed: love bombing, gaslighting, isolation from support networks, and the strategic exploitation of ambition and trust, all presented not as a personal vendetta, but as a scholarly examination of corporate psychological abuse. I contributed the theoretical framework and psychological analysis. Olivia provided the case study details with clinical detachment, referring to herself in the third person as the subject throughout. Together, we transformed her traumatic experience into a valuable contribution to the academic understanding of how powerful entities select and manipulate victims. The morning we submitted the final manuscript to Dr. Harmon, Olivia seemed lighter somehow, as if the academic framing of her experience had helped her process it. "It's strange," she said, staring at the confirmation email. "Writing about myself in the third person, analyzing Ethan's manipulation techniques like I'm discussing a lab specimen. It should feel detached or clinical, but instead, it's empowering. That's because you've reclaimed the narrative," I explained. "You've transformed yourself from victim to researcher, from object of manipulation to expert witness." 2 days later, Dr. Harmon called with unexpected news. "We're fast-tracking publication. The editorial board unanimously agreed. This paper merits immediate release, given its relevance to an ongoing case of significant public interest." "That's unusual for an academic journal," I noted, surprised by the uncharacteristic speed. "These are unusual circumstances. We're also promoting it more actively than our typical papers." His voice took on a note of admiration. "I must say, Margaret, this approach is brilliantly subversive. The Montgomerys won't know how to counter it." He was right. When the paper was published the following week, the media response was immediate, but fundamentally different from what we'd experienced before. Headlines shifted from sensationalist speculation about Olivia's tell-all plans to more thoughtful coverage. "Whistleblower publishes academic analysis of corporate scapegoating." Psychology professor and daughter transform pharmaceutical scandal into scholarly research. Academic paper offers unprecedented insight into corporate crime psychology. Even more satisfying was watching the Montgomery counter-narrative collapse. Their attempts to paint Olivia as attention-seeking fell flat against the measured, academic tone of our paper. Their legal team's efforts to discredit her as emotionally unstable contradicted the clear, logical analysis she had co-authored. This is what happens when you underestimate someone based on their gender and profession, Sarah Reynolds noted with satisfaction when she visited us after publication. They dismissed you as a shallow marketing girl who could be easily manipulated and discredited. They never bothered to consider that you had a psychology professor for a mother and the intelligence to turn their tactics against them. The academic paper accomplished something else unexpected. It created a safe way for other victims of corporate scapegoating to come forward. Within days of publication, Dr. Harmon's office was fielding requests from former employees at other pharmaceutical companies, financial institutions, and technology firms, all sharing similar experiences of being positioned to take blame for corporate malfeasance. "You've started something important," he told me during a follow-up call. "We're considering a special issue on corporate psychological abuse based on the response to your paper." Olivia listened to this news with quiet satisfaction. "Good," she said after I relayed Dr. Harmon's comments. "Maybe some other perfect scapegoat will recognize the warning signs before it's too late." The most unexpected response came a week after publication. A handwritten letter addressed to Olivia, delivered to my faculty mailbox. The elegant script on expensive stationery belonged to Diana Montgomery. Olivia opened it with trembling hands, reading aloud. "Ms. Wilson, I've read your academic paper. While I cannot comment on the legal case, I feel compelled to say this. You saw my family more clearly in a few months than I have allowed myself to see them in decades. Your analysis of how they select their victims resonated with painful familiarity. I was once young and ambitious too, before I became another kind of casualty of the Montgomery Empire. I wish you healing and justice. Diana Montgomery." Olivia set the letter down carefully. "She was a victim too," she said softly. "In a different way, but still. The patterns repeat," I agreed. "Different victims, same tactics. Not anymore." Olivia's voice strengthened with conviction. "Not for Diana, not for me, and hopefully not for whoever they might have targeted next." For the first time since the wedding day, I saw genuine peace in my daughter's expression. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. In transforming her experience into knowledge that might protect others, she had found a path forward through the wreckage the Montgomerys had created. The Southern District of New York Federal Courthouse stood imposingly against the Manhattan skyline, its neoclassical architecture a visual reminder of the weight of justice being sought within. 4 months after our academic paper was published, Olivia and I climbed those grand steps, surrounded by a phalanx of Justice Department officials rather than reporters, a welcome change from our earlier media encounters. "Ready?" I asked, pausing before the massive doors. Olivia nodded, smoothing her navy blue suit jacket. "As I'll ever be." Today, she would testify in the United States versus Montgomery Pharmaceuticals et al. Case, a pivotal witness for the prosecution. Assistant U.S. Attorney Harrington had prepared her extensively, but nothing could fully ready someone for facing their would-be destroyers across a courtroom. The courtroom was nearly full when we entered. The government side bustled with prosecutors and FBI agents, surrounded by boxes of evidence. The defense side presented a wall of expensive suits, lawyers from 3 prestigious firms representing various Montgomery executives. And there, at the defense table, sat Walter and Ethan Montgomery. Walter looked diminished somehow, his once commanding presence undercut by circumstances. Ethan, by contrast, appeared oddly composed, leaning occasionally to whisper to his separate legal team. The rumors of his cooperation deal with prosecutors had solidified into fact in recent weeks, though the exact terms remained confidential. I was directed to the spectator seating, while Olivia was led to a waiting room for witnesses. As I settled in, I caught Ethan watching me with an unreadable expression. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away. The proceedings began with typical formality. Judge Eleanor Simmons, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for running an efficient courtroom, established ground rules for the day's testimony. Harrington outlined for the jury what they would hear from Olivia, how she had been deliberately selected and positioned as a potential scapegoat for the company's negligence. When Olivia was finally called, she entered with her head high, steps measured. She took the oath with a clear voice that carried throughout the courtroom. Harrington began gently, establishing her relationship with Ethan, their engagement, the planned wedding. Then he shifted to the crucial events. Ms. Wilson, can you tell the court how you first became aware of Montgomery Pharmaceuticals' plan to make you the scapegoat for their contaminated medication? Olivia recounted the wedding day revelation with remarkable composure, describing how Sarah Reynolds had shown her emails and recordings just minutes before the ceremony would have concluded. And these documents indicated what, exactly? That I was being married and placed in a backdated executive position specifically to take the blame when the contaminated medication scandal became public, Olivia explained. The documents showed that Ethan and Walter Montgomery had discussed how my lack of pharmaceutical experience would make negligence charges more credible, and how my imprisonment would be, in their words, manageable for their long-term plans. A murmur ran through the jury as Harrington presented these documents, now official evidence, on the courtroom screens. Emails between father and son discussing Olivia's suitability as their solution to the contamination problem. Meeting notes about the Olivia contingency plan. A recorded conversation where Walter assured Ethan that once she's served her purpose, divorce is simple enough. Throughout this presentation, I watched the Montgomerys. Walter remained stone-faced, occasionally writing notes to his attorney. Ethan, however, couldn't seem to look at the evidence screens, his eyes fixed on the table before him. The cross-examination began with Walter's attorney, a hawk-faced woman with a reputation for aggressive witness questioning. Ms. Wilson, isn't it true that you were eager to join the Montgomery family business? She asked, her tone suggesting Olivia had been the ambitious one. I was interested in contributing my marketing expertise, Olivia replied evenly. I had no interest or qualifications in pharmaceutical quality control. Yet you didn't question being offered such a position? I did question it. Ethan assured me it would focus on the public-facing aspects of quality assurance, utilizing my marketing background. He never mentioned I would be signing off on medication batches or assuming regulatory responsibility. The attorney pivoted, attempting to suggest that Olivia had misinterpreted innocent business discussions, that her academic paper demonstrated an obsessive attempt to reframe a failed relationship in sinister terms. Olivia remained unflappable. The emails and recordings speak for themselves. My academic analysis simply placed them in the context of established psychological research on corporate scapegoating patterns. When Ethan's attorney declined to cross-examine Olivia at all, likely part of his cooperation agreement, a visible ripple of tension passed between father and son at the defense table. After 4 grueling hours, Olivia's testimony concluded. As she stepped down from the witness stand, Ethan finally looked up, their eyes meeting briefly across the courtroom. I couldn't read the expression that passed between them, some complex mixture of regret, shame, and perhaps recognition that transcended the simplified narratives of prosecution and defense. Outside the courthouse, protected from the waiting media by federal marshals who escorted us to a private exit, Olivia finally exhaled fully. You were magnificent in there, I told her, squeezing her hand. I just told the truth, she replied, echoing words she'd spoken months earlier after her FBI deposition. Though I admit, seeing Ethan in person again was harder than I expected. Because you loved him once, I acknowledged. That doesn't simply disappear, even when someone betrays you so profoundly. It wasn't just that. Olivia frowned slightly, struggling to articulate her thoughts. Seeing him there, so diminished, so clearly willing to sacrifice even his own father to save himself, it made me realize I never really knew him at all. The man I thought I loved never existed. That evening, alone in my apartment while Olivia met with her therapist, a weekly appointment that had become an essential part of her healing process, I received an unexpected call from Harrington. Dr. Wilson, I wanted to let you know that your daughter's testimony today was exceptionally effective, he began without preamble. The jury was visibly moved. More importantly, it appears to have caused a rift in the defense strategy. What do you mean? Walter Montgomery fired his legal team immediately after today's session. He's demanding new counsel and claiming his son has been coerced into false testimony against him. I absorbed this information silently, thinking of the Montgomery family dynamics, the controlling patriarch, the compliant son who had finally found the courage to save himself, albeit at everyone else's expense. "There's something else," Harrington continued. "Diana Montgomery has contacted our office. She wants to testify as a witness for the prosecution." "Diana?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "About what?" "Apparently, she has decades of information about similar patterns of corporate malfeasance and cover-ups. She claims your daughter's academic paper gave her the framework and vocabulary to understand what she's witnessed throughout her marriage." After ending the call, I stood at my apartment window, looking out at the university campus where I'd taught for 20 years. How strange that my academic work in psychology, work I'd pursued quietly while raising Olivia alone, had become intertwined with one of the most significant corporate fraud cases in recent history. I thought of Diana Montgomery, trapped in her gilded cage all these years, medicated into compliance, finally finding her voice. I thought of my own daughter, who had narrowly escaped becoming another casualty of the Montgomery empire, now transformed into both a key witness and an academic authority on the very tactics used against her. The Montgomery men had underestimated both women catastrophically. They had seen Diana as a decorative accessory to Walter's success, Olivia as an expendable pawn in their corporate chess game. They had failed to recognize the intelligence, resilience, and moral courage that can exist beneath seemingly compliant exteriors. When Olivia returned from therapy, I shared Harrington's news about Diana. "Good for her," Olivia said quietly. "It must have taken enormous courage. Like mother, like daughter-in-law, who never was," I observed with a small smile. Olivia laughed, a genuine sound I'd heard too rarely in recent months. "The Montgomery Women's Rebellion. Not exactly how I planned to bond with my almost mother-in-law." As we prepared dinner together in my small kitchen, I noticed a new lightness in Olivia's movements, a certain peace that had been absent since the wedding day. "You know," she said, chopping vegetables with precise movements, "today in court when I finished testifying, I finally felt it." "Felt what?" "Freedom." She looked up, eyes clear. "Not just from Ethan or the Montgomerys or the media circus. Freedom from wondering if I could have seen it coming, if I should have known somehow. Today I realized that their ability to deceive wasn't my failure. It was their expertise, honed over generations." I hugged her then, this remarkable daughter of mine who had walked through fire and emerged not just intact, but illuminated. "Their expertise," I said softly, "and ultimately, their downfall." The trial of United States versus Montgomery Pharmaceuticals et al. Lasted 7 weeks. 7 weeks of damning testimony from former employees, FDA investigators, and medical experts. 7 weeks of devastating evidence, falsified quality reports, deleted emails recovered from servers, recordings of executive meetings where the decision to ship contaminated medication was explicitly discussed and approved. Throughout it all, Olivia and I followed the proceedings from a distance, declining to attend after her testimony. She had done her part for justice. Now she was focused on rebuilding her life. She had moved out of my faculty apartment into a small place of her own in Brooklyn, found a position with a boutique marketing firm that specialized in ethical business practices, and started graduate school part-time, studying corporate ethics and compliance. On the day the jury was set to deliver its verdict, however, we both felt compelled to be present. The courtroom was packed, with media representatives filling the public gallery and a palpable tension hanging in the air. We slipped in quietly, taking seats near the back, just as proceedings began. Judge Simmons addressed the packed courtroom with characteristic efficiency. "I understand the jury has reached a verdict. Is that correct?" The jury foreperson, a retired schoolteacher with silver-rimmed glasses, stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Please hand the verdict form to my clerk." The clerk accepted the document, delivered it to the judge, who reviewed it briefly before handing it back. The clerk then faced the courtroom and began to read. "In the matter of United States versus Montgomery Pharmaceuticals et al., on the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant, Walter Montgomery, guilty." A ripple went through the courtroom. Beside me, Olivia tensed slightly. "On the count of criminal negligence resulting in death, we find the defendant, Walter Montgomery, guilty." The clerk continued methodically through the charges against each defendant. Walter Montgomery was found guilty on all 11 counts he faced. 3 other executives received guilty verdicts on most charges. Ethan Montgomery, in accordance with his cooperation agreement, had pleaded guilty to reduced charges weeks earlier. When the final verdict was read, Walter Montgomery showed no visible reaction beyond a slight tightening of his jaw. His empire of pharmaceutical dominance and carefully cultivated respectability had crumbled, yet he maintained the same impenetrable facade he'd worn throughout the trial. Judge Simmons scheduled sentencing for the following month, thanked the jury for their service, and adjourned the court. As spectators began filing out, Walter stood to be escorted back to detention by U.S. Marshals. For a brief moment, his eyes swept the courtroom, landing on Olivia with a flash of cold recognition before moving on. Outside the courthouse, we navigated through the media gauntlet with practiced efficiency, offering only brief, prepared statements. "We're gratified by the jury's careful consideration of the evidence," Olivia told the forest of microphones thrust toward her. "Justice has been served for the 12 people who lost their lives due to corporate negligence. Do you feel vindicated by the verdict?" a reporter called out. Olivia paused, considering the question with typical thoughtfulness. Vindication suggests this was somehow about me. It wasn't. It was about holding powerful people accountable for actions that hurt others. The verdict doesn't undo what was planned for me, but it does prevent similar harm to others in the future. As we moved away from the courthouse steps, a familiar figure approached. Diana Montgomery, elegant as ever in a simple gray suit, but with a new steadiness in her gaze that hadn't been present at the wedding. "Ms. Wilson, Dr. Wilson," she greeted us formally. "May I speak with you for a moment?" We stepped aside to a quieter area, away from the media crush. Up close, Diana looked both older and somehow more present than she had at the wedding, as if layers of carefully maintained facade had been stripped away. "I wanted to thank you," she said directly to Olivia. "Your testimony, and particularly your academic paper analyzing the psychological patterns at work, they gave me the framework I needed to understand my own experiences over 40 years of marriage." "I'm glad it helped," Olivia replied, her tone gentle but not overly familiar. The complicated reality of their connection, almost mother-in-law and daughter-in-law under false pretenses, created an unusual dynamic between them. "I've filed for divorce," Diana continued. "After my testimony, there was no going back, of course. But truthfully, there was no going back after reading your analysis." She smiled faintly. "Academic language can be quite clarifying. It helped me see that what I'd normalized for decades was actually systematic emotional manipulation." "What will you do now?" I asked, genuinely curious about this woman who had surprised everyone with her eventual courage. "Travel, initially. There are so many places I've never seen." Her expression softened with something like wonder. "Then perhaps advocacy work. There are many women trapped in similar situations. Marriages where psychological control is wielded so subtly they don't recognize it as abuse." We spoke for a few more minutes before parting ways, the unlikely connection between us both acknowledged and respected. As Diana walked away toward a waiting car, Olivia watched her thoughtfully. "She's starting over at 62, she murmured. "That takes incredible courage." "It's never too late to reclaim your life," I replied, something you helped her see. Later that evening, as we celebrated the verdict with a quiet dinner at Olivia's new apartment, she raised her wine glass in a toast. "To justice," she said simply. "To justice," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. "And to new beginnings." She smiled, more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. The media coverage should finally start dying down now. "Harrington says sentencing won't generate nearly the same circus, especially since Ethan's deal means he won't face a public sentencing hearing." I hesitated, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Have you heard from him at all? Since his plea deal?" Olivia set her glass down carefully. "He sent a letter, through his attorney, so it wouldn't violate any no-contact conditions." "What did it say?" "A lot of carefully worded quasi-apologies. I never meant for things to go so far. I was caught between impossible choices. I hope someday you can understand the pressures I was under." She shook her head. "Even now, he can't take full responsibility. Everything is framed as circumstances beyond his control, forces pushing him toward inevitable actions. Are you going to respond?" "No." The certainty in her voice was absolute. "There's nothing to say. His letter wasn't really for me anyway. It was for him. a way to maintain his self-image as fundamentally decent despite everything he did and was willing to do. I nodded, understanding both her insight and her decision. What about your academic paper? Any follow-up plans there? Her expression brightened. Actually, yes. Dr. Harmon wants me to co-present at the American Psychological Association conference next month. They're doing a special panel on corporate psychological manipulation. Apparently, our paper has sparked quite a lot of interest in the field. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. The academic work had become an unexpected bright spot in this difficult chapter, a way for Olivia to transform her personal trauma into professional insight. I'm nervous about public speaking, she admitted, but Sarah says it's important to be the one telling this story rather than having it told about me. Sarah's right, and you'll be brilliant. As dinner concluded, we stepped out onto Olivia's small balcony, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline with Manhattan glittering across the water. Somewhere in that skyline was the Montgomery Pharmaceuticals headquarters, its future now uncertain with its founder and CEO convicted of multiple federal crimes. Do you ever think about how close it came? Olivia asked quietly. If Sarah hadn't reached out to you that day, if you hadn't overheard that conversation, I would be facing charges right now, maybe already convicted. I try not to dwell on it, I admitted. But yes, sometimes it takes my breath away to think how differently things could have gone. She leaned against the railing, profile illuminated by city lights. I've been wondering lately if there's a way to create some kind of resource, a guidebook or training program, to help people recognize these patterns before they become victims. Something practical that translates the academic research into accessible warning signs. I smiled, recognizing in her words the emergence of purpose from pain. That sounds like exactly the kind of project that could help a lot of people. Maybe, she agreed, and maybe it's the reason all this happened. Not just to stop the Montgomerys, but to create something that prevents the next corporate predator from finding their perfect scapegoat. As we stood together in the gentle spring evening, I felt a profound sense of pride in this remarkable young woman, my daughter, who had walked through darkness and emerged determined to create light for others. 1 year to the day after what should have been her wedding, Olivia stood before an audience of 300 psychological professionals at the American Psychological Association's annual conference. She looked nothing like the bride she would have been. Gone was the elaborate updo and designer gown, replaced by a confident woman in a well-cut suit, her natural waves framing a face that had gained character through adversity. I watched from the front row as she adjusted the microphone, took a steadying breath, and began. Good morning. I'm Olivia Wilson, and I'm here to discuss a paper I co-authored with my mother, Dr. Margaret Wilson, titled Psychological Manipulation in Corporate Crime, a Case Study in Scapegoating and Victim Selection. As some of you may know, I was the subject of this case study, the designated scapegoat in what federal prosecutors have called one of the most calculated corporate fraud schemes in recent history. Her voice was clear and steady, carrying easily through the crowded conference hall. The audience, psychologists, researchers, and corporate ethics professionals leaned forward attentively. This was not a sensationalized media account, but a scholarly analysis presented by the woman who had lived it. Today, I want to focus on the psychological patterns that enable corporate scapegoating, particularly the selection criteria powerful entities use when identifying potential targets. Olivia clicked to her first slide, which outlined these criteria with academic precision. The Montgomery Pharmaceuticals case provides a textbook example of these patterns, which we've found replicated across industries and decades. As she continued her presentation, I marveled at the transformation. A year ago, Olivia had been shattered by betrayal, her confidence undermined, her future uncertain. Today, she commanded the room with academic authority, transforming her trauma into educational insight. The questions following her presentation were thoughtful and respectful, focusing on the psychological mechanisms at work rather than the salacious details that had dominated media coverage. Ms. Wilson, one audience member asked, given what you've learned, what warning signs would you now recognize in retrospect? Olivia considered the question carefully. Beyond the specific signs outlined in our paper, I think the most insidious aspect was how my own ambition was weaponized against me. The Montgomerys identified my desire for professional advancement and created an opportunity that seemed to validate my skills while actually positioning me for blame. They made me feel specially chosen when, in fact, I was being specially targeted. Do you believe your experience is transferable to other industries? Another asked. Absolutely. While the pharmaceutical context provided specific mechanics for the planned fraud, the psychological patterns are industry agnostic. We've received correspondence from former employees in finance, technology, and manufacturing who recognize the same selection and grooming patterns in their experiences. The moderator announced the final question, and a woman in the back stood. You've turned your experience into valuable academic work, but I'm curious, has this process been healing for you personally? Or does repeatedly analyzing your trauma keep it present in your life? I tensed slightly, concerned the question might be too personal for this professional setting, but Olivia nodded thoughtfully. That's an excellent question. The academic framing has been paradoxically both distancing and integrating. By analyzing my experience through a theoretical lens, I've been able to separate my personal emotional response from the objective patterns at work. This doesn't erase the trauma, but it transforms it from something that happened to me into knowledge I can use to help others. She smiled slightly. My therapist calls it meaning-making from trauma, and it's been an essential part of my recovery. The applause when she concluded was sustained and genuine. As people filed out for the coffee break, several attendees approached with business cards and questions. I hung back, allowing Olivia this professional moment without maternal hovering. Your daughter is remarkable, a voice said beside me. I turned to find Sarah Reynolds, who had slipped into the seat next to mine during the final questions. She is, I agreed, watching Olivia confidently navigate the networking conversations. Though I suspect your mentorship has played a significant role in her evolution. Sarah shook her head. I just provided some corporate context. This transformation is entirely her own making. After the conference sessions concluded for the day, the three of us gathered for dinner at a small restaurant near the hotel. Our conversation flowed easily, moving between academic discussion of the day's presentations and more personal updates. I received the final paperwork today, Sarah mentioned as our entrees arrived. The Montgomery Pharmaceuticals whistleblower settlement. After taxes and legal fees, it's still substantial. Congratulations, Olivia said warmly. Well deserved after what you risked to come forward. Speaking of settlements, I added, has there been any movement on the Victim Compensation Fund? Sarah nodded. The judge approved the structure last week. The families of those who died from the contaminated medication will receive priority distributions, followed by those who suffered serious health effects. At least some good has come from all this, Olivia observed quietly, though no amount of money can truly compensate for those losses. What about Walter's sentencing appeal? I asked. The Montgomery patriarch had received 25 years, essentially a life sentence at his age, and had immediately filed appeals. Still working its way through the system, Sarah replied. But his chances aren't good. The evidence was overwhelming, and Judge Simmons ran a very clean trial. Olivia had been unusually quiet about Ethan's much lighter 5-year sentence, a result of his cooperation agreement. She hadn't attended his sentencing hearing, choosing instead to submit a written victim impact statement that the prosecutor had described as powerfully restrained. I saw Diana last month, Sarah continued, changing the subject. She's working with a nonprofit focused on financial literacy for women leaving controlling relationships. She seems lighter somehow. Good for her, Olivia said sincerely. She deserves a fresh start. As dinner concluded and we stepped out into the warm evening air, Olivia checked her phone and smiled. Good news? I asked. The advance copies of the handbook arrived at my apartment. She showed me the delivery notification. First tangible result of the Scapegoat Prevention Project. The Scapegoat Prevention Project had evolved from Olivia's initial idea of creating practical resources for potential victims of corporate manipulation. With funding from a nonprofit foundation focused on corporate ethics, she had developed a comprehensive handbook translating academic research into accessible warning signs and protective strategies. How many copies in the first printing? Sarah asked. 10,000. The corporate ethics training circuit has already pre-ordered most of them. Olivia's expression was quietly satisfied. Companies are surprisingly eager to incorporate this material into their ethics programs. Turns out the Montgomery case created a lot of there but for the grace of God thinking among corporate boards. From almost scapegoat to sought-after ethics consultant, I observed. Not the career path you envisioned a year ago. Definitely not, she agreed with a small laugh, but somehow more meaningful than anything I'd planned. We walked together through the city streets, our conversation turning to future projects. Olivia's plans for expanding the prevention program, Sarah's consulting work with regulatory agencies, my upcoming sabbatical to write a book on corporate psychological manipulation. "Have you decided about the interview request?" Sarah asked Olivia as we approached the hotel. "The 60 minutes retrospective on the case?" Olivia nodded. "I'm going to do it, not to revisit the trauma, but because it reaches an audience that academic papers and training programs don't. People who might recognize themselves or someone they care about in the patterns we've identified." "You've come so far," I said softly, feeling a surge of maternal pride that almost overwhelmed me. "From that day in the garden gazebo to here, it's remarkable." "I had good help," she replied, squeezing my hand. "A mother who saw through the facade, a whistleblower who risked everything to warn us, a prosecutor who believed us, and your own resilience," Sarah added firmly. "Don't discount that." Later that night, alone in my hotel room, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. The Montgomery case had finally begun to fade from public consciousness, overshadowed by newer scandals and controversies. Walter Montgomery was serving his sentence at a federal medical facility. Ethan was in a minimum security prison, his future after release uncertain but surely diminished. Montgomery Pharmaceuticals had been sold off in pieces, its name retired from the marketplace. But from the wreckage of that corporate empire and the shambles of Olivia's almost marriage had emerged something unexpected, a new field of study, a prevention program with potential to protect countless others, and most importantly, a transformed relationship between mother and daughter. The crisis that could have destroyed Olivia had instead revealed her true strength and character. My phone buzzed with a text message from Olivia. "Can't sleep? Too much conference adrenaline? Breakfast at 7? I replied immediately. "Absolutely. Proud of you today. Always." Her response came seconds later. "Couldn't have done any of it without you. We make a good team." I smiled at the simple truth of it. We did indeed make a good team, not just in academic collaboration or crisis management, but in the more fundamental work of supporting each other through life's unexpected turns. The wedding that never happened had seemed like an ending 1 year ago today. Instead, it had become the beginning of something far more valuable than either of us could have imagined, a journey of discovery, purpose, and deeper connection that continued to unfold with each passing day. Thank you very much for listening to me this far. Please rate this video from 0 to 10, like it, and subscribe to the channel.